That programme will be reviewed next Saturday on BBC Two in Armchair Critics, which will be shown at 6:25.
Milton Schulman, drama critic of the London Evening Standard, Robert Cushman, drama critic of The Observer, and Simon Hoggart, who writes for The Guardian. And the three programmes we'll be talking about are The Rear Column, a play by Simon Gray, a programme of songs, satirical and polemical, from groups performing in the Fringe Theatre and called Fringe Benefits, and the documentary Wicker's World, about the San Francisco police. And we start with the play. The freewheeling anthology of songs, you could call them protest songs or satirical songs, and all of them aim to make some sort of anti-establishment social comment. They're about women's rights or being on the dole, consumer society or the perils of marriage. This one, with a nod at Gilbert and Sullivan, is about the police force.
We like provoking anti-Nazi groovers, and we love the tacky bashing down the lane. We adore it on the anti-street manoeuvres, throwing all the squatters out into the rain, through the rain. And Chief Constable J. Anderton's our savior, 'cause he knows the sword is mightier than the pen. And he wants to legalize our bad behavior and give power to our elbow once again. Amen.
That account of the policeman's lot was sung by a group called Belt and Braces. Oh, that made me laugh, but I have to confess that, on the whole, it wasn't my sort of music. Robert Cushman, was it your sort of music?
A lot of it wasn't, especially if you're talking just about the music as distinct from the lyrics. But it was a lot of different types of music. That particular song, because of the Gilbert and Sullivan flavour to it, was actually rather endearing, despite what they were meaning to tell you. You grew rather fond of the policeman doing the funny little up-and-down gestures that policemen always have to do. It was a programme with a definite sort of shape to it, because it started out wooing you gently and ended up bashing you in the face. And on the whole, the more it bashed you in the face, the less I liked it. I liked some of the early songs quite a lot. A nice bluesy song called The Only One, which was based on the idea of young people feeling, because they keep seeing glamour figures all around them, that they are the only people left in the world whom nobody could ever possibly fall in love with. That seems to me to be a valid and funny and touching point. It was quite well illustrated, actually, in the actual filming of the programme by cutaways of the advertisements who were influencing them. There were other times when the cutaways earlier on, presumably because it was felt that this was television, you had to illustrate it somehow, just seemed to me to be a bit glib. You know, somebody sings about the dole and there is a picture of a dole queue. It started with a lively song called Welfare State, which was meant to be savage, but actually was, and had a pounding rhythm to it, but actually was quite funny. Ain't it grand, ain't it great living in the welfare state. It wasn't making any very heavy satirical points, it was just pointing out a sort of generalized absurdity, and you shrugged your shoulders and laughed with it. Then there were a couple of songs about the plight of women. They weren't my kind of music, because they had the sort of rather droning folk song tone to them that I don't like at all. But the lyrics actually seemed to me to be sharp, and I forgave the music for the sake of the lyrics. Later on, when we got to the Sadista singers getting really heavily into women's rights, I did lose sympathy, because I felt a different kind of political relationship was coming across. It had nothing to do with what they were trying to say or sing. It's to do with a political relationship between performers and audience. It's to do with what happens when you shout at an audience and try to bully them, when it seems to me that what you're saying just goes out of the window. All you're really interested in is asserting your power. I think any relationship between performers and audiences is a power relationship, and it's as vital in this area as in the other that power shouldn't be abused. I felt it very much too later on with the song that turned out to be about Ulster in the end, called City Men Talking, which just ended with a reiterated shout of troops out, troops out. Okay, that's the sort of pounding rock I don't like anyway. But again, it seemed to me that I didn't want to know what they were telling me because of the way in which they were telling me.
And the objections, such as there were to this programme, were that some of the songs were absolutely rotten. They had rotten, boring tunes, as Robert's just said, and some of them had amazingly banal words. There seemed to be a kind of group of theatre writers, or a class of theatre writers, who think that all you actually need to do is to put the right key words in, like dole, unemployment, police violence, and so forth, and you've got a great song that makes a social statement. And there's one that we had called Reclaim the Night, which was a line in, gotta run when the sun goes down. That sounds like a scene from an Australian outback movie or something. It would be pursued by kangaroos, maybe. But in fact, she was singing about Soho being full of nasty men at night. And it had in lines like, men believe I'm property, born to be subordinate, born to please and born to breed. And that's not songwriting. That would look okay in a copy of Socialist Worker or any other.
Extremely obvious, I thought, and rather raw and unpolished. Now, that's everybody's idea of the fringe theatre. Milton Shulman, what is the fringe theatre?
Well, I think it's a great misnomer to call this fringe. I mean, fringe, I'm afraid, is usually anything that isn't in the West End. It's, on the whole, on a certain level, it's a good psychiatric therapy for the people involved. They're conducting most of their activities in theatres the size of telephone kiosks, and it keeps them off the street, and I'm all for it. But the idea that fringe has anything to do with protest and anti-authority and anti-establishment is a total misnomer. Most fringe theatres in London, I think, are doing Chekhov and Shakespeare and Strindberg and things of that kind. So that, and what I dislike about the idea of calling it fringe is that this was definitely by a group of people who were anti-authority, who were anti-establishment, and I quite agree with Simon when he says that the views were so banal. There have been political songs. I remember, songs about the company store and things of that kind, which had a tremendous drive to them, had good lyrics. These were, there was a line that I think in the girls sing, female euphoria is very hard to find. Now, female euphoria is very hard to find. Yes, I would agree. I would think in the English language, very hard to find. And the idea that somehow or other that nationalized steel being run by the Sheffield mafiosa, the idea that there's no discrimination at all politically about what they're trying to do. They're attacking bosses, but bosses happen to be themselves. I find it very, very old-fashioned and rather sad that something better isn't coming out of the left than this type of stuff.
Robert Cushman, could you have given them some ideas? You're a bit of a performer yourself in this field, though rather in a different way, I think.
Performing I've been involved in has been in a totally different way. It has actually taken place on the fringe. I agree with Milton that the fringe is a very large area and that you can't lump it all together. I think he's rather patronising about it. I think it's generally a lot more professional than he'll let on. And I think this particular area that we are shown, though it's not my kind of fringe theatre, either as a spectator or on the occasions in which I've been a performer, does exist, accounts for quite a large proportion, is worth putting on television. I've never actually seen it put on television at this length before. I think it's very good, but it should be allowed, whatever we think of it, that it should talk and sing for itself instead of just being reduced to a series of interviews. Because whatever the material is like, it's much better to be able to see and hear it than to see and hear what even the performers themselves think about it. Now, unpolished, some of the performers, as Simon said, were extremely good. There was a performer called Fine Time Fontaine from the Red Ladder Theatre Company, who early on sang a song called Temptation, in which he was a Mephistophelian figure singing about the allurements of the consumer society. Again, it's a slightly glib point, made even more glib by the way in which it was televised. But it's a good, funny enough song in its own way. It was very well put across indeed. He was the same performer who did the Sheffield songs, Steel, Peach and Townsend. And okay, you may not agree with the sentiments expressed, but it seems to me that they were pretty well expressed. You could see what the sting in the tail was going to be, admittedly, but it did still sting.
Well, I must sting you in the tail there, Robert Cushman, because we've got to move on finally to San Francisco.